Have you ever had one of those moments where a simple act of kindness completely changed the direction of your life? Maybe you helped a stranger pick up dropped groceries, or you stopped to comfort someone having a bad day. I'm curious, where are you watching from tonight? Drop your state or country in the comments, because I think we all have these stories, these moments when compassion opens a door we never expected to walk through. For me, that moment happened on a Friday night in a restaurant kitchen, and it led me somewhere I never could have imagined. The Friday dinner rush at Songbird was finally winding down, and Mina Park felt every single hour of her double shift in her aching feet and the persistent throb behind her eyes. She balanced 3 plates along her left arm with the practiced ease of someone who had been waitressing since high school, her right hand carrying 2 more as she navigated through the main dining room. The upscale Korean fusion restaurant in the heart of Manhattan's Koreatown was her second job, the one that made the difference between barely scraping by and actually making her nursing school tuition payments on time. At 24, Mina had gotten very good at calculating her life in shifts and tips. Morning classes, afternoon study sessions, evening shifts at the diner near her apartment in Astoria, and 3 nights a week she made the trek into the city for the higher-end clientele at Songbird. The money was better here, significantly better, but the work was harder. The customers were demanding. The expectations were higher. One mistake could cost her the job, and she couldn't afford that. Not when she was this close to finishing her degree, to finally building the stable life she'd been fighting for since she left home at 18. She delivered the plates to table 12 with a smile that felt more genuine than it had an hour ago. The end was in sight. Another 45 minutes, and she could catch the subway home, fall into bed, and sleep until her alarm dragged her back to consciousness for her Saturday morning anatomy lecture. The couple at the table barely acknowledged her as she set down their entrees, too absorbed in their conversation to notice her existence beyond the function she served. Mina was used to that. In restaurants like this, servers were meant to be invisible until needed. She was halfway back to the kitchen when she heard it. A crash, loud enough to cut through the ambient noise of dinner conversation and the subtle jazz playing through the restaurant sound system. Then a child's scream, high-pitched and furious, followed by another crash. Every head in the dining room turned toward the private room in the back, the one usually reserved for business dinners and small parties. Mina's manager, Richard, appeared at her elbow so quickly she nearly jumped. His face was pale, his expression hovering somewhere between panic and fury. "We have a situation," he hissed, his voice low enough that nearby diners wouldn't hear. "Private dining room. The Kong Party. The Kong Party." Mina knew that name, had heard the other servers whispering about it when the reservation came through earlier in the week. She didn't know the specifics, but she understood enough. Korean names carried weight in this neighborhood, and some carried more weight than others. The kind of weight that came with men in expensive suits and the subtle presence of security hovering near the entrances. Another scream erupted from the private room, followed by rapid-fire Korean that Mina couldn't quite make out from this distance, but recognized as a child's tantrum. She'd heard that particular pitch of distress before, working in the pediatric unit during her clinical rotations. That wasn't just anger. That was a child in genuine emotional distress. Richard grabbed her arm. "I need you to go in there and see if you can help calm the situation. The other servers are afraid to approach." Mina pulled her arm free, gently but firmly. "What exactly is happening?" "The client's son is having some kind of meltdown. Throwing dishes, screaming, won't listen to anyone." Richard's jaw was tight. "This is a very important client, Mina. Very important. We cannot have this continue." There was something in the way he said important that made Mina's stomach tighten with an old, familiar wariness. She'd learned to read those kinds of emphases, to understand when important meant dangerous. But she also heard the genuine distress in that child's voice, and 6 years of working toward a career in pediatric nursing had trained certain instincts into her that were hard to ignore. "I'll see what I can do," she said, and before Richard could give her any more instructions or warnings, she was moving toward the private dining room. The door was slightly ajar, and through it, Mina could see the aftermath of what must have been several minutes of chaos. Porcelain shards littered the floor where plates had been thrown or knocked off the table. A water pitcher lay on its side, liquid spreading across the polished wood. And in the center of it all, a small boy, maybe 6 years old, stood with his fists clenched and tears streaming down his flushed face, screaming something in Korean between sobs. Around the table, 5 men in expensive suits sat frozen, their expressions ranging from uncomfortable to openly irritated. These were men used to control, used to situations bending to their will, and the presence of one small, out-of-control child had clearly shattered whatever business discussion they'd been having. But it was the man standing near the child who caught Mina's attention and held it. He was probably in his early 30s, tall with dark hair styled with careful precision despite the obvious stress of the moment. His suit was impeccable, the kind of tailored perfection that spoke of serious money, and his features had the sharp, aristocratic quality that would have made him striking even without the intensity radiating from him. But it was his eyes that stopped Mina in the doorway. Dark and focused entirely on the crying child, they held a combination of desperation and helplessness that she recognized immediately. This was a father at the end of his rope, a man who was powerful in every aspect of his life except this one crucial thing. Hyun, the man was saying, his voice tight with controlled patience that was clearly fraying at the edges. Hyun, you need to calm down. Please. We talked about this. You promised you would be good tonight. The boy, Hyun, only screamed louder, his small body rigid with whatever emotion was driving this outburst. He grabbed a cloth napkin from the table and threw it, the gesture more about expressing his anguish than causing any real damage. One of the men at the table, older with silver threading through his black hair, cleared his throat. Perhaps we should reschedule this discussion. Calm. Clearly this isn't the right time. The flicker of something dangerous crossed the tall man's face. There, and gone so quickly Mina almost missed it. That won't be necessary, he said, his tone absolutely level despite the chaos around them. Give me just a moment. But Hyun was beyond listening. He dropped to the floor now, pulling his knees to his chest and rocking slightly, his sobs taking on a desperate, hiccuping quality that Mina had seen before in children who'd worked themselves into a state where they couldn't calm down on their own. She saw the exact moment the boy's breathing started to become irregular, saw the signs of a child spiraling toward a full panic attack. She didn't think about it. She just moved, stepping carefully over the broken porcelain. Mina crossed the room and lowered herself to the floor a few feet away from Hyun, close enough to be present, far enough not to crowd him. She could feel every eye in the room on her, could sense the tall man's sharp attention, but she kept her focus on the child. Hey, she said softly in Korean, her accent carrying the slight regional flavor of her hometown near Busan. Her grandmother had insisted she maintain the language even after they immigrated when Mina was 7. Hey, that's a lot of big feelings you're having right now. Hyun's sobbing hitched slightly. He didn't look up, but she could see him processing her words. The fact that she was speaking Korean, that her voice was calm and gentle rather than demanding or frustrated. Mina glanced around and spotted what she'd hoped to find. A child's drawing, partially crumpled, lying near the overturned water pitcher. She reached for it carefully, smoothing out the paper. This is really good, she continued in Korean. Did you draw this? Slowly, incrementally, Hyun's crying began to quiet. He peeked up at her through his fingers, his face blotchy and streaked with tears. His mother's name was written at the top of the drawing in careful, childish handwriting. Your mom, Mina said gently, understanding clicking into place. You miss her. Is that why you're so upset? Hyun's face crumpled again, but this time instead of screaming, he nodded. The words came out in a rush, half Korean, half English, the way children who grew up bilingual often express their deepest emotions. I forgot to bring her picture. Daddy said I could bring one picture of Mommy, and I forgot it, and now she's not here, and I wanted her here. Oh, sweetheart. Mina's heart clenched. That must feel really scary, forgetting something that important. She glanced up briefly and found the tall man, calm, staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Something raw and grateful and stunned all at once. Their eyes met for just a second, and Mina felt an unexpected jolt of awareness, a recognition of something she didn't have time to examine. Looking back at Hyun, she made a decision. You know what? Your mom isn't in a picture. She's in here. Mina placed her hand gently over her own heart, then extended her hand toward Hyun, stopping short of actually touching him without permission. Can I show you something? Hyun nodded, his breathing still uneven but calming. Mina pulled a pen from her apron pocket and turned over one of the cloth napkins, beginning to sketch. She wasn't an artist, but she could manage simple shapes. She drew a heart, and inside it, she wrote the Korean word for mother. Your mom lives in your heart, she said. She's there all the time, even when you don't have her picture. And you know what else? She's so proud of you. Do you know how I know? Hyun shook his head, watching her with wide, reddened eyes. Because you love her so much that forgetting her picture made you this upset. That means you remember her. That means she's important to you. And I bet she loved you so much, and that love didn't go away. It's still here. Mina touched her heart again. Right here. Hyun was quiet for a long moment, processing. Then, tentatively, he placed his small hand over his own chest. Here, right there, Mina confirmed, smiling softly. Always there. The boy's breathing had evened out. He wiped his face with the back of his hand, leaving a streak of tears across his cheek. Can you draw with me? He asked, his voice small and exhausted in the way children's voices got after big emotional storms. Just for a little? Mina knew she should get back to work, knew Richard was probably having a heart attack somewhere in the main dining room. But looking at this child's face, at the desperate hope in his expression, she couldn't bring herself to say no. For a few minutes, she told him. Then I have to go back to work. But we can draw together until then. She settled more comfortably on the floor, hyper-aware of her rumpled server's uniform and the fact that she was currently sitting in the middle of a very expensive private dining room surrounded by men who looked like they bought and sold companies before breakfast. Hyun scooted closer to her, pulling out more napkins, and began drawing what appeared to be a house. Above them, she heard movement. The older man who'd suggested rescheduling spoke again, his tone considerably warmer than before. We can continue this discussion early next week. Calm. I think we all understand sometimes family must come first. There was a murmur of agreement from the other men, the scrape of chairs as they stood. Mina kept her attention on Hyun, on the careful way he was drawing windows on his house. But she was intensely aware of the tall man, calm, standing just a few feet away. She could feel the weight of his gaze, could sense something shifting in the air around them. Thank you, Kong said to his departing associates, his voice carrying that same absolute control she'd noticed before. My apologies for the interruption. I'll have my assistant contact you Monday morning. The men filed out, and then it was just the three of them in the destroyed dining room. The silence felt heavy, loaded with something Mina couldn't name. She focused on Hyun, on asking him questions about his drawing, on keeping him calm and regulated. After a few minutes, the tall man lowered himself to the floor on Hyun's other side, his expensive suit somehow not looking ridiculous as he sat cross-legged on the polished wood. He watched his son draw for a moment, and Mina saw the exhaustion in his face now that his business associates were gone. The careful control slipping just enough to show the overwhelmed single father beneath. I'm Jason, he said quietly, speaking English now. Jason Kong. And I cannot begin to tell you how grateful I am for what you just did. Mina looked at him properly for the first time, and the full impact of his presence hit her without the distraction of the chaos. He was objectively handsome, but it was more than that. There was an intensity to him, a sense of barely contained power that made her instinctively wary and inappropriately drawn to him at the same time. His eyes were dark and intelligent, currently fixed on her with an attention that made her skin prickle with awareness. Mina, she managed, her voice steadier than she expected. Mina Park. I'm a server here. And it was nothing, really. He just needed someone to listen. It wasn't nothing. Jason's jaw tightened, and she saw something flash in his eyes. Frustration, maybe. Self-recrimination. Hyun's nanny quit 2 days ago. I thought I could handle bringing him to this dinner. I thought he'd be okay. I was wrong. Hyun looked up at his father, and Mina saw the love there, immediate and uncomplicated in the way children loved. Daddy, I'm sorry I was bad. You weren't bad, buddy. Jason's voice gentled immediately, and Mina watched him transform from the controlled businessman into someone softer, more vulnerable. You were sad. That's different. But we talked about how when we feel big feelings, we need to use our words instead of throwing things, remember? Hyun nodded, suitably chastened. Then he looked at Mina. Will you stay? Just a little longer? She should say no. She really, truly should say no. Richard was probably having an aneurysm, and she still had 3 tables in the main dining room who needed attention. But looking at this little boy's hopeful face, at the quiet desperation in his father's eyes, Mina found herself nodding. A little longer, she agreed. But then I really do have to get back to work. Jason stood up in one fluid movement and pulled out his phone. Give me just a second, he said, and stepped toward the door. Mina couldn't hear the conversation, but she saw him speaking rapidly to someone, saw the gesture he made that somehow communicated authority and expectation in equal measure. When he returned, he settled back on the floor with them. Your manager has been informed you'll be occupied for the next half hour, he said simply. You won't be penalized for the time. Mina blinked. How did you just do that? Jason's expression was unreadable. I'm a regular here. They're accommodating. He paused, then added, I also made it clear that you're doing me a considerable favor, and that any inconvenience is entirely my responsibility. There was something in the easy way he'd handled that, in the certainty that his request would be granted, that reinforced Mina's initial read of this man. Jason Kong wasn't just wealthy. He was powerful. The kind of powerful that made managers scramble to accommodate him, that filled private dining rooms with tense men in expensive suits, that probably came with a whole world of complications Mina was better off not examining too closely. But Hyun was tugging on her sleeve, showing her his drawing of the house, asking her to draw a garden, and Mina pushed those thoughts aside. For now, she was just a woman sitting on a floor with a sweet kid who missed his mother. Everything else could wait. They drew together for 20 minutes, Hyun's energy gradually settling into something calmer, more regulated. Jason watched them, occasionally adding his own contributions to the collaborative napkin artwork, and Mina felt hyper-aware of his presence in a way that was entirely inappropriate given the circumstances. Every time his hand brushed near hers as they reached for the same pen, every time she caught him looking at her instead of the drawing, she felt that same jolt of awareness. This was dangerous. She knew it instinctively, not just because of who this man clearly was, but because of the way her heart was beating faster, the way she kept noticing details about him, the way his expression softened when he looked at his son, the slight Seoul accent underneath his American English, the strength in his hands as he helped Hyun draw a tree. When her time was finally up, Hyun had transformed from the screaming, desperate child of 40 minutes ago into a sleepy boy who could barely keep his eyes open. The emotional storm had drained him completely. I need to get back to work, Mina said gently, starting to stand. But it was really nice drawing with you, Hyun. The boy grabbed her hand. Will you come back? Can you come play with me again? Mina's heart squeezed. Oh, sweetheart. I don't think I can do that. I work here at the restaurant, but I don't really know your family. Jason stood as well, and Mina was reminded again of his height. He topped her 5'5" frame by a good 7 or 8 inches. What if you could? He asked, his voice carefully neutral. Know our family, I mean. She looked at him, confused. Jason glanced at his son, then back to her. Could we speak privately for a moment? Just outside. Mina hesitated. Every self-preservation instinct she'd honed over years of living on her own in New York screaming at her to politely decline and get back to the safety of the main dining room. But something in Jason's expression, a combination of hope and desperation that mirrored what she'd seen in Hyun's face, made her nod. Let me just check on my tables, she said. Give me 5 minutes. Those 5 minutes felt both endless and far too short. Mina distributed check folders, refilled water glasses, and tried very hard not to think about what Jason Kong might want to speak to her about privately. Richard appeared at her elbow again, his expression anxious. Is everything okay? Mr. Kong seemed satisfied when I spoke with him, but I wanted to check. Everything's fine, Mina assured him, even though she had no idea if that was true. The situation is resolved. When she returned to the private dining room, Jason had cleaned up most of the broken porcelain and righted the overturned furniture. Hyun was curled up in one of the chairs, genuinely asleep now, his face peaceful in a way that tugged at Mina's heart. Jason gestured to the hallway outside the private room, and Mina followed him, hyper-aware of the intimacy of the narrow space, of how close they were standing. I'm going to ask you something, Jason said without preamble, and I want you to know that there's absolutely no pressure to say yes. But I saw what you did in there with Hyun, and I haven't seen anyone connect with him like that since his mother died 2 years ago. Mina's breath caught. I'm so sorry for your loss. Thank you. Jason's expression flickered, pain there and gone. It's been difficult for both of us, but especially for Hyun. He was 4 when it happened, old enough to remember her, young enough to not fully understand why she's gone. Mina nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She thought of the drawing, of Hyun's careful script spelling out his mother's name, and felt tears prick at her eyes. His nanny quit 2 days ago, Jason continued. She was with us for 8 months, and Hyun had finally adjusted to her. And then she took another position with a family in Connecticut. I've been scrambling to figure out childcare, and tonight was a disaster that I should have seen coming. He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. You said you work here as a server. Is this your only job? I'm also in nursing school, Mina said, uncertain where this was going. I work at a diner during the day, and I pick up shifts here 3 nights a week. I'm trying to finish my degree. Jason nodded slowly. What if I offered you a job as Hyun's caregiver? Flexible hours around your school schedule, salary significantly higher than what you're making now. Your background in nursing makes you uniquely qualified, and clearly you have a gift with children. Mina stared at him, convinced she'd misheard. You want to hire me? You don't know anything about me. I can run a background check. Jason's expression was completely serious. But what I saw in there told me more than any piece of paper could. You calmed my son when no one else could, including me. You were kind to him, patient. You didn't see him as a problem to be managed, but as a child in pain who needed help. That's not something that can be taught. It was a good offer, an incredibly good offer, the kind that would eliminate her constant financial stress, let her focus on school instead of juggling multiple jobs and still barely making ends meet. But Mina had learned to be suspicious of things that seemed too good to be true, especially coming from men who radiated the kind of power Jason Kong did. I appreciate the offer, she said carefully, but I don't think I'm the right fit for your family. Why not? Because I don't know who you are. Mina met his eyes directly. Not really. And something tells me that getting involved with your family comes with complications I'm not prepared to handle. Jason held her gaze for a long moment. You're right, he said finally. There are complications. Things about my life and my work that are difficult. But what I can promise you is that Hyun would be safe with you, and you would be safe with us. I protect what's mine, Mina. The way he said it, the absolute certainty in his voice, sent a shiver down her spine that was equal parts warning and something far more dangerous. She barely knew this man. She should absolutely not be reacting to him this way. Let me think about it, she said, which wasn't a no, but wasn't a yes either. Jason pulled out his wallet and extracted a business card. My personal number, he said, handing it to her. Call me when you decide. Even if the answer is no, I'd like to properly thank you for what you did tonight. Maybe let me take you to dinner? No obligations, no ulterior motives beyond gratitude. Mina took the card, her fingers brushing his briefly. The contact sent another one of those inappropriate jolts through her nervous system. I should get back to work, she said. Of course. Jason stepped back, giving her space. Thank you again, Mina. Truly. She nodded and fled back to the main dining room, her heart racing and her mind spinning. She tucked Jason's business card into her apron pocket and tried to focus on finishing her shift, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the private room, to Hyun's tear-stained face and the way he'd relaxed against her side as they drew together, to Jason's dark eyes and the desperation underneath his controlled exterior, to the way she'd felt for those few minutes on the floor of that dining room, like maybe she'd found something she hadn't even known she was looking for. It was dangerous thinking, the kind that led to bad decisions and broken hearts. Mina had worked too hard rebuilding her life after her own bad decisions to risk it all on a man she didn't know, no matter how much his son had tugged at her heartstrings. But as she caught the subway home 2 hours later, exhausted and aching and turning Jason's business card over in her fingers, Mina couldn't quite convince herself to throw it away. Mina didn't expect to see Jason Kong again that night. She'd assumed he would collect his sleeping son and disappear back into whatever world powerful men like him inhabited, leaving her with nothing but a business card and the strange, unsettled feeling their encounter had created in her chest. But when her shift finally ended at 11:30 and she emerged from the kitchen after changing out of her uniform, she found him waiting in the now empty dining room. Hyun was awake again, though barely, leaning heavily against his father's side with the drowsy, boneless quality of an exhausted child fighting sleep. Jason stood when he saw her, and Mina felt that same jolt of awareness she'd experienced earlier. even rumpled from the evening's chaos. Even with his tie loosened and his hair slightly mussed, he looked like he belonged in this upscale space in a way she never would. "I wasn't sure you'd still be here," Mina said, stopping a few feet away and very aware of her own appearance. She'd changed back into jeans and a sweater, pulled her hair out of its required ponytail, and she probably looked as tired as she felt. "I wanted to thank you properly," Jason said, "and I hoped we could talk a bit more. If you have time." Mina glanced at Hyun. "He should be in bed." "He should," Jason agreed, a wry smile touching his lips. "But he insisted on waiting to say goodbye to you." As if on cue, Hyun straightened slightly and gave her a sleepy smile. "Thank you for drawing with me," he said in careful English, clearly reciting something his father had coached him to say. "I had a nice time." Mina's heart melted despite all her reservations. "I had a nice time too," she told him, crouching down to his eye level. "You're a very good artist." Hyun's smile widened, and then he did something that caught Mina completely off guard. He stepped forward and wrapped his small arms around her neck in a tight hug. The gesture was so trusting, so sweet, that Mina felt tears prick at her eyes. She returned the embrace gently, breathing in the scent of children's shampoo and something else, something warm and safe that made her chest ache. When Hyun pulled back, Jason was watching them with an expression that made Mina's breath catch. There was something raw in his face, something vulnerable and hopeful that he didn't quite manage to hide quickly enough. "Could I give you a ride home?" Jason asked. "It's late, and I'd feel better knowing you got there safely." Every self-preservation instinct Mina possessed screamed at her to decline. She didn't know this man. She didn't get into cars with strangers, no matter how expensive their suits were or how sweet their children seemed. But she was exhausted, and the subway at this hour always made her nervous. And there was something about Jason that made her feel, inexplicably, safe. "That's kind of you," she said slowly. "But I can take the train. I do it all the time." "I'm sure you do." Jason's tone was gentle but persistent. "But it would make me feel better. Please, consider it part of my thank you for tonight." Mina hesitated, weighing options and instincts. Finally, she nodded. "Okay, thank you." The car was waiting outside, a sleek black SUV with windows tinted dark enough that Mina couldn't see inside. A driver stood beside it, a compact man in his 40s who nodded respectfully at Jason and held the door open. Mina noticed the way the man's jacket fit, noticed the careful way he scanned the street before they approached the vehicle, and felt her wariness tick up another notch. This was the world Jason lived in. Private drivers, security, vehicles that probably cost more than she'd make in 5 years. It should have intimidated her. It did intimidate her. But as Jason settled Hyun into a car seat in the back and then gestured for Mina to sit beside his son, she found herself sliding into the leather seat and trying to process the surreal turn her evening had taken. Jason took the front passenger seat, giving her space, and Mina appreciated that consideration even as she wondered if it was calculated. The driver pulled into traffic without needing an address, and Mina realized Jason must have already told him where she lived. She should probably be concerned about that, about the fact that this man had somehow obtained her address, but she was too tired to work up the appropriate alarm. Hyun was asleep again within minutes, his head lolling against the car seat, and the vehicle fell into a comfortable silence broken only by the ambient noise of the city at night. Mina watched the familiar streets pass by and tried to ignore the fact that she was intensely aware of Jason's presence in the front seat, of the occasional glimpses she caught of his profile in the passing streetlights. "How long have you been working at Songbird?" Jason asked after a few minutes, his voice low to avoid disturbing Hyun. "About 8 months, Mina answered. "Since last March." "And nursing school?" 2.5 years in. Another 1.5 years to go, if everything stays on track. That's a long time to work 2 jobs while in school. Jason turned slightly in his seat, looking back at her. "You must be exhausted." Mina shrugged. "It's what needs to be done. I don't have family support, so working is the only option." "No family at all." The question was casual, but Mina heard the genuine curiosity underneath. "Not locally," she said, keeping her voice neutral. "My grandmother raised me, but she passed away when I was 20. I have some extended family back in Korea, but we're not close." "I'm sorry," Jason said, and the sympathy in his voice sounded genuine. "That must be difficult." "I manage," Mina replied, which was her standard response to questions about her situation. She'd learned years ago that people didn't really want to hear about the messy reality of being essentially alone in the world, about the constant low-level anxiety of having no safety net, no one to call if things went wrong. The SUV pulled up outside her building in Astoria, a five-story walk-up that had seen better decades. Mina felt a flush of embarrassment at the contrast between this and what she assumed was Jason's living situation, but she pushed the feeling aside. She'd worked hard for her studio apartment on the third floor. She had no reason to be ashamed of it. "Thank you for the ride," she said, reaching for the door handle. "Wait," Jason said. "Please, just a few more minutes." Mina settled back into the seat, watching him. The driver had gotten out of the vehicle, giving them privacy, and she was suddenly very aware that she was alone in a car with a man she didn't know, her guard lowered by exhaustion and Hyun's sweet presence. Jason turned fully in his seat now, his expression serious. "I meant what I said earlier about the job offer. I'd like you to consider it seriously, Mina. What would it take to convince you?" "You don't know anything about me," Mina pointed out, repeating her earlier objection. "For all you know, I could be completely unqualified." "I'll run a background check," Jason said simply. "But I'm a good judge of character, and what I saw tonight told me everything I needed to know about the kind of person you are." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Hyun has been struggling since his mother died. We both have. I've tried 3 different nannies, and none of them have been able to reach him the way you did tonight. He doesn't trust easily anymore. But he trusted you." Mina looked at the sleeping child, at the peaceful expression on his small face, and felt her resolve wavering. "It's not that I don't want to help," she said quietly. "It's that I'm not sure it would be wise. For either of us." "Why not?" "Because you're not just a regular client looking for childcare." Mina met Jason's eyes directly. "I don't know exactly what you do, but I'm not naive. The way people treat you, the security, the business dinner that was clearly more than just business. You're someone important, someone powerful, and that kind of life comes with complications I'm not equipped to handle." Jason was quiet for a long moment, and Mina saw him weighing something, making a decision. "You're right," he said finally. "I'm not just a regular client. My family has business interests that are complex and sometimes dangerous. I won't lie to you about that. But what I can promise is that Hyun is kept separate from the riskier aspects of what I do. He has a security detail. He's protected. And you would be too, if you worked for us." The confirmation of what she'd suspected should have sent Mina scrambling out of the car. Instead, she found herself asking, "What kind of business interests?" "The kind that require discretion," Jason said carefully. "The kind that mean I can't always be the father Hyun needs because I'm handling situations that I'd rather he never has to know about." He leaned forward slightly. "I can't give you details, Mina. Not yet, maybe not ever. But I can tell you that I would never put you or my son in danger knowingly. Your safety would be my priority." Mina wanted to press for more information, wanted concrete answers that would help her make a rational decision. But she also understood what he was saying. This was a world that operated on trust and secrecy, and she was being asked to take a leap of faith based on very little information. "The money would be 3 times what you're making now," Jason continued. "Full benefits, including health insurance. Flexible schedule around your classes. Use of a car service for transportation. And a signing bonus to cover any immediate expenses." It was a staggering offer. The kind that would completely change Mina's financial situation, that would eliminate the constant stress of making rent and tuition payments, that would let her actually focus on her studies instead of being perpetually exhausted from working multiple jobs. It was, quite literally, too good to be true. "I need to think about it," Mina said. "This is a big decision." "Of course." Jason pulled out another business card and a pen, writing something on the back. "This is my personal cell number. Call me when you've decided. No pressure, no expectations. But I hope you'll say yes." Mina took the card, her fingers brushing his again in that same brief contact that sent an inappropriate shiver through her. "I'll call you within 48 hours, she promised. "One way or the other. That's all I ask." Jason smiled, and the expression transformed his face, made him look younger and less guarded. "Thank you for considering it. And thank you again for tonight." Mina nodded and slipped out of the car, standing on the sidewalk as the SUV pulled away. She watched until the taillights disappeared around the corner, then let herself into her building and climbed the 3 flights of stairs to her apartment. Inside, she dropped her bag on the small table by the door and stood in the center of her studio, looking at the space that had been her sanctuary for the past 2 years. It was tiny, barely 400 square feet, but it was hers. Clean and safe and paid for by her own hard work. The thought of giving that up, of entering Jason Kang's orbit and whatever complications came with it, made her stomach twist with anxiety. But the thought of Hyun's tear-stained face, of the way he'd hugged her so trustingly, of the desperation in Jason's eyes when he talked about failing his son, that made something else twist in her chest. Something that felt dangerously like hope and purpose and the kind of connection she'd been avoiding since her last disastrous relationship. Mina changed into pajamas and climbed into bed, but sleep was elusive. She stared at the ceiling and tried to think rationally about Jason's offer, but her mind kept drifting to other details. The way he'd looked at her when Hyun hugged her, the careful distance he'd maintained in the car, respecting her space. The exhaustion she'd seen in his face when he thought she wasn't looking. She must have finally fallen asleep because the next thing she knew, sunlight was streaming through her single window and her phone alarm was blaring. Saturday morning anatomy lecture waited for no one, and Mina dragged herself out of bed feeling like she'd been hit by a truck. The day passed in a blur of lectures and studying, and it wasn't until Mina was walking home from the library that evening that she noticed it. A black SUV, different from Jason's, but similar enough to catch her attention, parked across the street from the library entrance. It pulled into traffic when she did, maintaining a careful distance behind her. Mina's heart started pounding. She told herself she was being paranoid, that there were thousands of black SUVs in New York City, that this was just a coincidence. But the vehicle stayed behind her for 3 blocks, 4, 5. When she turned down a side street that wasn't on her usual route, the SUV turned as well. Panic rising in her throat, Mina ducked into a convenience store and watched through the window. The SUV slowed, then stopped across the street. The windows were too dark to see inside, but she felt eyes on her, felt the weight of being watched and assessed. She stayed in the store for 15 minutes, pretending to browse while her mind raced. When she finally emerged, the SUV was gone. Mina practically ran the remaining 6 blocks to her apartment, checking over her shoulder constantly, and didn't breathe easily until she was inside with the door locked and the chain engaged. This was what Jason had warned her about. Complications. Danger. The reality of his world pressing into hers in a way that made her previous concerns seem quaint. Mina's hands shook as she pulled out her phone. She should call the police. She should report being followed. But what would she even say? That a car had driven on the same street she walked? That she had a feeling she was being watched? They'd think she was paranoid or attention-seeking. Instead, she found herself staring at Jason's business card, at the personal number he'd written on the back. This was connected to him somehow. It had to be. She'd been fine until last night, until she'd involved herself with his son, until she'd entered his orbit, however briefly. The rational part of her brain screamed that this was a sign, that she should stay as far away from Jason Kang and his complicated, dangerous life as possible. But another part, the part that remembered Hyun's trusting hug and Jason's desperate hope, wondered if maybe the danger was already here whether she took the job or not. Across the city, Jason Kang sat in his office on the top floor of a building in Midtown, reviewing security footage on multiple monitors. His second-in-command, Taemin, stood beside his desk with a tablet, his expression grim. The Lee family had someone watching her, Taemin said, pulling up photographs on the tablet. Black SUV, 2 men inside. They followed her from the library to a convenience store in Astoria, then broke off when she went inside. Professional tale, not trying too hard to hide. Jason's jaw tightened as he watched the footage of Mina hurrying down the street, watched the SUV maintaining its careful distance. He'd known this was a risk, known that his enemies watched him constantly for any sign of weakness or leverage. But seeing Mina, innocent and unaware, being tracked by people who would use her against him if given the chance, that ignited a cold fury in his chest. How did they identify her so quickly? Jason asked, his voice dangerously quiet. You spent 40 minutes in that private dining room with your son and a woman you'd never met before, Taemin said pragmatically. Your business associates saw her, the restaurant staff saw you waiting for her after her shift, you drove her home personally. Word travels fast in our circles. The Lees have people everywhere. Jason stood and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, his hands clenched behind his back. He'd been selfish. He'd known the risks, and he'd pursued contact with Mina anyway because of what she'd done for Hyun, because of the way she'd made him feel something other than the constant weight of responsibility and grief. And now she was in danger because of him. Increase her security detail, Jason said. Discreet, but comprehensive. I want eyes on her at all times. She hasn't accepted the job yet, Taemin pointed out. She might refuse. In fact, after being tailed, she'll probably refuse. Then we protect her anyway. Jason turned back to face his second. This is my fault. I brought her into this. I won't leave her exposed. Taemin nodded, unsurprised. This was who Jason was, the protective instinct that drove him, the code he lived by. You care about her, he observed. After one evening. Jason didn't deny it. There was something about her, he said quietly. The way she was with Hyun. The strength underneath the exhaustion. I saw it immediately. The Lees will see that too, Taemin warned. If you pursue this, she becomes a target. A permanent one. I know. Jason's voice was grim. Which is why she needs to be protected whether she takes the job or not. Make it happen. After Taemin left, Jason stood at the window for a long time, looking out at the glittering city and thinking about the waitress with kind eyes and hidden strength who'd calmed his son with gentle words. He'd meant what he said about protecting her. But he also knew he'd been selfish in even approaching her, in offering her a job that would tie her to his world, in wanting her close despite the danger. His phone sat on the desk, silent. He'd told her to call within 48 hours, but part of him hoped she wouldn't. Hoped she'd recognize the danger and stay far away from him and Hyun and the complications that came with the Kong name. But another part, the part that remembered the way Hyun had smiled for the first time in weeks, the way Mina's presence had eased something tight in Jason's chest, that part hoped she'd call. Hoped she'd say yes. Hoped she'd take the risk, even though she shouldn't. In her small apartment in Astoria, Mina sat on her bed with Jason's business card in one hand and her phone in the other. She'd been sitting like this for an hour, paralyzed by indecision and fear and something that felt dangerously like longing. The sensible choice was obvious. Call Jason, politely decline the job offer, and go back to her normal life of double shifts and financial stress, but relative safety. Forget about the sweet little boy who'd hugged her so trustingly. Forget about the man with desperate eyes who'd offered her a chance at something better. But Mina had never been particularly good at taking the sensible path. If she had been, she never would have left home at 18 with nothing but a backpack and her grandmother's encouragement. She never would have enrolled in nursing school while working full-time. She never would have survived the last 2 years rebuilding herself after a relationship that had nearly broken her. She thought about Hyun asking if she'd come play with him again. She thought about Jason's admission that his son didn't trust easily anymore, that he'd been struggling to reach him since his mother died. She thought about the way her own childhood might have been different if someone had stepped in, if someone had cared enough to stay when things got hard. Before she could talk herself out of it, Mina pulled up the number Jason had given her and typed out a text message. Her finger hovered over the send button for a long moment. This was it. The decision point. The moment where she chose safety or risk, isolation or connection. Mina took a deep breath and pressed send. The message was simple. Just 3 words that would change everything. I'll take it. Jason's response came within minutes of Mina's text, a simple message asking if she could start Monday morning and providing an address in Tribeca. Mina stared at her phone, at the reality of what she'd just committed to, and felt her stomach flip with a mixture of anticipation and terror. She'd quit both her jobs over the weekend, given notice to Richard at Songbird and to her manager at the diner, both of whom had looked at her like she'd lost her mind when she couldn't provide details about her new position beyond childcare for a private family. Monday morning arrived too quickly and too slowly at once. Mina stood outside the building Jason had directed her to, a sleek glass and steel tower that screamed wealth and exclusivity, and seriously considered turning around and running. The doorman, an older man in an immaculate uniform, greeted her by name before she'd even approached the entrance. Mississippi Park, he said with a warm smile. Mr. Kong is expecting you. Top floor, penthouse level. The elevator is keyed for you. The fact that Jason had already arranged access, that people knew her name, that this was all happening so smoothly, should have comforted her. Instead, it reinforced how far out of her depth she was. But Mina squared her shoulders, thanked the doorman, and stepped into the marble lobby like she belonged there. The elevator was the kind of quiet, smooth ride that only came with serious money. Mina watched the floors tick by and tried to calm her racing heart. She'd changed outfits 4 times that morning before settling on dark jeans and a simple sweater, professional enough for childcare, but not trying too hard. Her reflection in the polished elevator doors looked pale and nervous, and she forced herself to take deep breaths. The elevator opened directly into Jason's penthouse, and Mina stepped out into a space that took her breath away. The entire far wall was floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson River and the sprawl of Lower Manhattan. The morning sun poured in, illuminating an open-plan living area that was all clean lines and expensive furniture, the kind of studied minimalism that required both money and taste to achieve. She heard them before she saw them. Hyun's excited voice calling out, and then he was running toward her, his small face lit up with genuine joy. "You came. You really came." Mina crouched down and caught him in a hug, breathing in that familiar scent of children's shampoo and feeling something in her chest ease. "Of course I came," she told him. "I promised, didn't I?" When she looked up, Jason was standing near the kitchen, watching them with an expression that made heat creep up her neck. He was dressed more casually than she'd seen him before, dark slacks and a white button-down with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms that Mina definitely should not be noticing. His hair was slightly damp, like he'd recently showered, and without the armor of his full suit, he looked somehow more approachable and more dangerous at the same time. "Thank you for coming," Jason said, moving toward them. "I wasn't entirely sure you would after this weekend." Mina straightened, keeping one hand on Hyun's shoulder. "Why wouldn't I?" Jason's expression flickered. "I had my security team monitoring the situation. I know you were followed on Saturday. I know it probably scared you." So Mina's instincts had been right. The SUV had been real, had been connected to Jason's world. She should be angry about that, should be demanding answers, but mostly she just felt a weary kind of vindication. "At least I wasn't being paranoid," she said. "No, you weren't. And I'm sorry." Jason's voice was tight with something that sounded like guilt. "This is exactly the kind of complication I warned you about. If you want to reconsider, I understand." Hyun's hand tightened in hers, and Mina looked down at him. The boy was watching her with wide, anxious eyes, and she saw the fear there. The fear of another person leaving, another loss in a young life that had already held too much loss. "I'm not going anywhere," Mina told him firmly, and then looked up at Jason. "I said I'd take the job. I meant it. But I think we need to have a very honest conversation about what I'm walking into." "We will," Jason promised. "After I show you around and you get settled with Hyun. Then we'll talk. About everything." The tour of the penthouse took 20 minutes and left Mina's head spinning. 3 bedrooms, each with its own bathroom. A kitchen that looked like it belonged in a restaurant. A media room, a home office, a terrace with outdoor furniture that probably cost more than her car. Hyun's room was a child's paradise, filled with toys and books and a bed shaped like a race car that made the boy grin with pride as he showed it off. "And this is the guest room," Jason said, opening a door to reveal a space that was larger than Mina's entire studio apartment. "You're welcome to use it whenever you need to. If you're here late, if weather is bad, if you just don't feel like making the commute. I want you to be comfortable here." The room was beautiful, decorated in soft grays and blues, with its own bathroom and a window overlooking the river. Mina stood in the doorway and tried to process the casual generosity of the offer, the way Jason was already making space for her in his home, in his life. "Thank you," she managed. "That's very generous." "It's practical," Jason corrected gently. "You're going to be spending a lot of time here. It makes sense to have a space that's yours." Over the next 2 weeks, Mina fell into a routine that felt both surreal and surprisingly natural. She arrived at the penthouse at 7 each weekday morning, usually finding Jason already awake and making breakfast with Hyun. The domestic scene always caught her off guard, this powerful man in expensive clothes cracking eggs and chatting with his son about the day ahead. They'd established a schedule quickly. Mina would take over after breakfast, getting Hyun ready for school, walking him the 3 blocks to the private academy he attended with 2 security guards maintaining a discreet distance. She'd pick him up at 3, help with homework, prepare a snack, and then they'd play or read or work on art projects until Jason came home. Except Jason's schedule was unpredictable. Sometimes he'd be home by 5, joining them for dinner and spending the evening with Hyun before bedtime. Other times he'd call to say he'd be late, and Mina would handle the bedtime routine herself, reading stories and making sure Hyun brushed his teeth and said his prayers. Those evenings, she'd find herself staying later than necessary, curled up on the couch with a textbook while Hyun slept, telling herself she was just making sure Jason got home safely, but knowing it was more than that. She wanted to see him, wanted to hear about his day, wanted those moments of adult conversation after hours of child-focused energy. She learned things about them both during those weeks. Learned that Hyun was incredibly bright but struggled with emotional regulation, that loud noises made him anxious, that he had nightmares about his mother at least twice a week. Learned that Jason carried an enormous amount of guilt about his wife's death, that he second-guessed every parenting decision, that he was desperately afraid of failing his son the way he felt he'd failed his wife. She learned that Jason took his coffee black, that he had a scar on his left hand from a childhood accident, that he spoke at least 3 languages fluently. She learned that he was patient with Hyun in ways that surprised her, that he never raised his voice even when frustrated, that he read bedtime stories with different voices for all the characters in a way that made Hyun giggle. And she learned that she was developing feelings that went far beyond professional concern, feelings that made her heart race when Jason smiled at her over Hyun's head, that made her hyper-aware of his proximity when they stood together in the kitchen, that made her thoughts drift to dangerous territory when she was alone at night in her apartment. It was a Wednesday evening, nearly 3 weeks into her employment, when everything shifted. Jason had called to say he'd be home late, some kind of business emergency that required his presence, and Mina had gone through the usual bedtime routine with Hyun. But instead of settling easily, the boy had been restless, anxious, asking repeatedly when his father would be home. Finally, after the 3rd time Mina had gone into his room to reassure him, Hyun had started crying in earnest. Not the tantrum tears from that first night at the restaurant, but the deep, heartbroken sobs of a child confronting grief too big for his small body to contain. "I miss Mommy," he'd said, clinging to Mina's neck as she sat on his bed. "I miss her so much, and she's never coming back, and sometimes I can't remember what her voice sounded like." Mina had held him, rocking him gently and letting him cry, murmuring reassurances that felt inadequate in the face of such profound loss. She'd told him about her own grandmother, about how grief was love with nowhere to go, about how it was okay to be sad and okay to talk about his mother whenever he wanted. Eventually, Hyun had cried himself into exhaustion and fallen asleep against her shoulder. Mina had held him for a long time after that, reluctant to move and risk waking him, her own eyes wet with tears for this sweet boy who'd lost so much so young. She must have dozed off because the next thing she knew, the room was dark except for the night light, and someone was gently lifting Hyun from her arms. Mina's eyes flew open to find Jason, still in his suit from whatever meeting he'd been at, carefully transferring his sleeping son to the bed. "Sorry," Jason whispered. "I didn't mean to startle you. I just got home." Mina stood on unsteady legs, her body stiff from sitting in one position for so long. "What time is it?" "Nearly midnight." Jason pulled Hyun's blanket up, brushing hair back from his son's forehead with infinite tenderness. "You didn't have to stay this late." "He had a hard night," Mina said quietly, following Jason out of the room and pulling the door mostly closed behind them. "He was asking about his mom. I didn't want to leave him alone." Jason's expression cracked, pain flashing across his face so quickly Mina almost missed it. "He does that sometimes. The grief comes in waves. Some days he's fine, and then something triggers it, and it's like losing her all over again." They stood in the hallway outside Hyun's room, close enough that Mina could smell Jason's cologne mixed with something else, smoke maybe, from wherever he'd been. She could see the exhaustion in his face, the weight of responsibility he carried, and felt a surge of empathy so strong it made her chest ache. "You look exhausted," Mina said. "When was the last time you ate?" Jason blinked, seeming surprised by the question. "I don't remember. Lunch, maybe? It's been a long day." "Come on," Mina said, making a decision. "I'm making you food. You can't take care of Hyun if you're running on empty." "You don't have to do that," Jason protested, but Mina was already moving toward the kitchen. "I know I don't have to, but I'm going to anyway. Sit." To her surprise, Jason obeyed, settling onto one of the stools at the kitchen island while Mina explored his refrigerator. Someone, probably a meal service, kept it well stocked with fresh ingredients. She pulled out eggs, vegetables, rice from the pantry, and set about making a quick fried rice while Jason watched her in silence. "You're good at this," he observed after a few minutes. "Comfortable in my kitchen. I've been cooking since I was 8, Mina said, dicing vegetables with practiced efficiency. "My grandmother taught me. She said knowing how to feed yourself was the most important survival skill." She was right. Jason's voice was soft. "Tell me about her." "Your grandmother." Mina kept her hands busy, kept her eyes on the food she was preparing, because talking about her grandmother always brought emotions close to the surface. "She raised me after my parents died when I was 7. Car accident, like your wife. She brought me to the States when I was 12, worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat. She was tough and fierce and the kindest person I've ever known." "She sounds remarkable." "She was," Mina agreed, blinking back tears. "She died of a heart attack 4 years ago. Sudden, unexpected. One day she was fine, the next day she was gone. I didn't even get to say goodbye." "I'm so sorry," Jason said, and the genuine sympathy in his voice made Mina's throat tighten. "That must have been devastating." "It was." Mina scooped rice into a bowl and brought it to him along with chopsticks. "I barely functioned for months afterward. She was all I had." "Is that when you started nursing school?" "After. I spent about 6 months in a really dark place, making bad decisions, trying to fill the hole she'd left. Then I met someone who I thought could help me heal, and that turned into its own disaster." Mina heard herself speaking and wondered why she was sharing this. Why Jason's quiet presence made her want to unload years of carefully guarded pain. "When that relationship ended, I realized I needed to build something for myself. Something stable. So I enrolled in school, got serious about my future." Jason was eating, but his attention was entirely on her. "What kind of disaster was the relationship?" Mina hesitated, then decided she'd already said this much. Might as well be honest. "He was controlling. Wanted to know where I was all the time, who I was talking to. It started small, just concern, and then it escalated. By the end, he was going through my phone, showing up at my work unannounced, making me account for every minute of my time. When I finally left, he made it clear he didn't appreciate being abandoned." Jason's jaw tightened, and something dangerous flashed in his eyes. "Did he hurt you?" "Not physically," Mina said. "Not much, anyway. But he made me afraid. Made me question my own judgment. It took a long time to trust myself again." "And yet you're here," Jason said quietly. "Working for a man you barely know. A man who comes with his own complications and dangers. That takes courage." "Or stupidity," Mina said with a slight smile. "I haven't decided which yet." Jason set down his chopsticks and looked at her directly. "I need you to know something. I would never hurt you. Never control you. Never make you afraid. What you went through, that's not who I am." Mina believed him, which was perhaps foolish given how little time they'd actually spent together. But there was something in Jason's eyes, in the way he'd been with Hyun, in the careful way he'd maintained professional distance even when she felt the attraction crackling between them, that made her trust him. "I know," she said softly. "I wouldn't be here if I thought otherwise." The moment hung between them, charged with something neither of them was quite ready to name. Then Jason's phone buzzed, breaking the spell, and he glanced at it with a frown. "Excuse me," he said. "I need to take this." He stepped away, moving to his office, and Mina heard his voice shift into rapid Korean, the tone clipped and authoritative. She cleaned up the kitchen, giving him privacy, but she couldn't help noticing the tension in his shoulders visible through the glass walls of his office, the aggressive gestures he made as he spoke. When he emerged 20 minutes later, his expression was grim. "I'm sorry about that. Business issues that required immediate attention." "Everything okay?" Mina asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. Jason was quiet for a moment, seeming to weigh how much to tell her. Then he sighed. "Do you remember that conversation we were supposed to have? About what you're walking into?" "Yes. I think we need to have it now." Jason gestured toward the couch. "If you have time." Mina checked her phone. It was nearly 1 in the morning. She had class at 9, but she wasn't going anywhere until she got answers. "I have time." They settled on the couch, careful to maintain a respectable distance, and Jason ran a hand through his hair in a gesture Mina was learning meant he was stressed. "My family has been involved in business in New York for 3 generations," he began. "Legitimate business, mostly. real estate, imports, restaurants. But there are other aspects, other connections, that exist in gray areas of the law. You're in organized crime, Mina said bluntly. Like the Korean Mafia or something. Jason's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile under different circumstances. That's a dramatic way to put it, but not entirely inaccurate. We have business relationships with organizations on both sides of legal boundaries. We settle disputes. We provide services. We maintain order in certain communities where official channels fail. Mina absorbed this, trying to reconcile the man sitting across from her with the reality of what he was describing. And the people who followed me? Who are they? A rival organization. The Lee family. Jason's voice hardened. We've had an understanding for years, but recently they've been pushing boundaries, trying to expand into territory that's been ours for decades. They see any change in my life as potential weakness to exploit. And I'm a change in your life. You are, Jason confirmed. A very visible one. They're watching to see if you're a vulnerability they can use against me. Mina's stomach clenched with fear and anger. So by giving me this job, you made me a target. Yes. Jason met her eyes directly, not flinching from the accusation. I knew it was a risk, and I did it anyway because I needed help with Hyun and because I was selfish enough to want you close despite the danger. That was wrong of me. If you want to walk away, I'll understand. I'll also make sure you're protected regardless of your decision. Mina wanted to be angry. Part of her was angry. But she also understood desperation, understood the choices people made when they were drowning and someone threw them a lifeline. And she understood that Jason was being honest with her now, laying out the reality without sugarcoating or manipulation. What does protection look like? She asked. Security detail, discreet but constant. Someone watching your apartment, following you to school, making sure you're safe. Jason paused. I've already had that in place since the first incident. I hope you'll forgive the intrusion, but I couldn't risk your safety. So I've had bodyguards for 3 weeks and didn't know it, Mina said. Yes. She should be furious about that, about the invasion of privacy, about the unilateral decision made on her behalf. But mostly she just felt tired and overwhelmed and strangely touched that Jason had been protecting her without expecting anything in return. I need you to be honest with me about something, Mina said. Is Hyun in danger? Real danger, not just theoretical. He has security at all times, Jason said carefully, and he's kept separate from the riskier aspects of my business. But yes, there's always some level of risk. It's why his mother's death hit him so hard. It wasn't an accident, was it? Jason's face went pale, and Mina saw the answer before he spoke. The car crash that killed Mincio was deliberate, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. A message to me. They used her to hurt me, and Hyun lost his mother because of who I am and what I do. Oh, Jason, Mina breathed, her anger dissolving into sympathy. I'm so sorry. I failed to protect her, Jason continued, and she could hear the guilt that had been eating at him for 2 years. I knew the risks. I should have had better security. I should have insisted she stay home that day. I should have done 1,000 things differently. And instead, she died and Hyun lost his mother, and it's my fault. It's not your fault, Mina said firmly. The people who killed her, they're responsible. Not you. I put her in that position by being who I am. And she chose to be with you knowing who you were. Mina leaned forward, willing him to hear her. You can't take responsibility for other people's evil actions. You can only do your best to protect the people you love, which is exactly what you're doing now. Jason looked at her with such raw emotion that Mina's breath caught. And what about you? He asked quietly. You're not just an employee anymore, Mina. You've become important to Hyun. And to me. That makes you a target. How do I protect you when you won't even accept that you need protection? I'm not saying I won't accept it, Mina said. I'm saying I need to understand what I'm accepting. I need to make an informed choice about whether to stay or go. And Jason's voice was tight. What do you choose? Mina thought about Hyun's tear-stained face, about the way he'd clung to her earlier, and sobbed about missing his mother. She thought about Jason's exhaustion and guilt and desperate love for his son. She thought about the way she felt when she walked into this penthouse every morning, like she was coming home instead of going to work. I choose to stay, she said. But I need you to promise me something. Anything. No more secrets. If there's a threat, you tell me. If something changes, you tell me. I can't protect myself if I don't know what I'm dealing with. Jason nodded slowly. I promise. No more secrets. And one more thing, Mina added. I'm not fragile. I've survived a lot, and I'm stronger than you think. So stop treating me like I'm going to break at the first sign of trouble. A genuine smile crossed Jason's face, the first she'd seen all evening. Noted. No kid gloves. Good. Mina stood, suddenly aware of how late it was and how close they'd been sitting. I should go. I have class in 8 hours. Stay, Jason said, standing as well. Use the guest room. It's late and you're exhausted. Your things are already there. Mina blinked. My things? I took the liberty of having some essentials brought in. Toiletries, a change of clothes in your size, things you might need if you stayed over. Jason had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. I hope that's not too presumptuous. It was absolutely presumptuous, and also surprisingly thoughtful in a way that made Mina's heart do something complicated in her chest. That's fine, she managed. Thank you. They stood facing each other in the dimly lit living room, the city sprawling behind Jason through the windows, and Mina felt the pull of attraction so strongly it made her dizzy. She wanted to close the distance between them, wanted to see if his lips were as soft as they looked, wanted to know if the controlled power he radiated would translate to the way he touched her. But she was his employee, and he was grieving his wife, and there was a 6-year-old child sleeping down the hall who needed stability more than he needed to witness his father starting something complicated with his caregiver. Good night, Jason, Mina said, stepping back deliberately. Good night, Mina, Jason replied, and the way he said her name, low and warm, sent shivers down her spine. She fled to the guest room and closed the door, leaning against it and trying to calm her racing heart. This was dangerous. This pull she felt toward Jason, this growing attachment to Hyun, this sense of belonging in a world that wasn't hers and never could be. She was setting herself up for heartbreak, walking into a situation that had disaster written all over it. But as she changed into the pajamas that had mysteriously appeared in the dresser, as she slipped between sheets that smelled like expensive detergent and lay in a bed far more comfortable than her own, Mina couldn't bring herself to regret her decision. She was staying. For Hyun. For Jason. And maybe, just a little bit, for herself. The morning after their late-night conversation, Mina woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Hyun's laughter drifting from the kitchen. For a disoriented moment, she couldn't remember where she was, and then the events of the previous night came flooding back. The guest room. Jason's revelations about his wife's murder. Her decision to stay despite the danger. She found them in the kitchen, Jason flipping pancakes while Hyun sat at the counter drawing, and the domestic scene made something in Mina's chest constrict with longing. This was what she'd always wanted and never thought she'd have. A family. A home. A sense of belonging. Good morning, Jason said, looking up with a smile that made her pulse quicken. I hope we didn't wake you. Not at all, Mina said, accepting the cup of coffee he poured for her. This is nice. Over the next few days, that became the new normal. Mina staying over more often than not, using the guest room, but increasingly feeling like she lived there. Her apartment in Astoria sat mostly empty, a place she returned to only to collect mail and water the plants that were slowly dying from neglect. It was Thursday evening, nearly a week after she'd first stayed over, when Jason brought it up directly. They were cleaning up after dinner, Hyun already bathed and in his pajamas watching a movie in the living room, and Jason turned to her with an expression that told Mina he'd been planning this conversation. I think you should move in, he said without preamble. Not permanently, not in any official capacity. But the guest room is already yours. You're here most nights anyway. It would be safer for you to be here full-time until the situation with the Lee family stabilizes. Mina's hands stilled on the dish she was drying. That's a big step. It's a practical one, Jason countered. You're spending half your life commuting between here and Astoria. Your apartment isn't secure. And frankly, I sleep better knowing you're here where I can protect you. There it was again, that protective instinct that both warmed her and made her wary. I don't need you to protect me every second of the day, Mina said carefully. I'm capable of taking care of myself. I know you are. Jason set down the pan he'd been washing and turned to face her fully. But why should you have to when I have the resources to make your life easier and safer? This isn't about thinking you're weak. It's about me being able to help and wanting to. Mina wanted to argue, wanted to assert her independence and her ability to manage her own life. But she was also exhausted from the constant commute, And the truth was she felt safer here in this fortress of glass and steel with Jason's security team monitoring every entrance. And more than that, she liked being here. Liked the morning routine with Jason and Hyun, liked the comfortable evenings after Hyun went to bed when she and Jason would talk for hours about everything and nothing. 1 month trial, she said finally. If it feels too weird or too complicated, I go back to my apartment and we pretend this never happened. Deal, Jason agreed. And the relief in his expression told Mina this had been more important to him than he'd let on. When she told Hyun the next morning that she'd be staying in the guest room for a while, the boy's face lit up with such pure joy that Mina felt tears prick at her eyes. Really? You're going to live here with us? For a little while. Yes, Mina confirmed, and Hyun threw his arms around her waist in a hug that nearly knocked her over. This is the best day ever, he declared, and Mina caught Jason's eye over his son's head, saw the emotion there that mirrored her own complicated feelings. The next week brought a new complication in the form of Jason's mother. Sun Hee Kang arrived at the penthouse on a Saturday afternoon without warning. A small, elegant woman in her 60s with iron gray hair styled in a perfect bob and eyes that seemed to see straight through any pretense. Jason had been out handling business, and Mina was alone with Hyun when the elevator opened and Sunny stepped out. The woman took one look at Mina, at her casual jeans and the paint smudges on her shirt from an art project with Hyun, and her expression went ice cold. "You must be the new nanny," Sun Hee said in Korean, her tone making it clear she'd found Mina lacking before a single word had been exchanged. "I'm Mina Park," Mina replied in the same language, grateful her grandmother had insisted she maintain fluency. "I'm Hyun's caregiver, and you must be Mrs. Kang. It's a pleasure to meet you." Halmoni. Hyun appeared from his room, using the Korean word for grandmother, and launched himself at Sun Hee with obvious affection. The woman's expression transformed instantly, warming as she caught her grandson in a hug and kissed his forehead. "My sweet boy," Sun Hee murmured, switching to English for Hyun's benefit. "You've grown so big. Have you been eating well?" "Mina makes really good food," Hyun informed her proudly. "She makes Korean pancakes, just like Mommy used to." The temperature in the room dropped about 20 degrees. Sunny's gaze snapped back to Mina, something sharp and dangerous in her eyes. "Does she now?" Over the next hour, Mina endured what felt like an interrogation disguised as polite conversation. Sunny asked about her family background, her education, her intentions, all while maintaining a veneer of civility that didn't hide the steel underneath. This was a woman who had survived in a dangerous world, who had raised a son in that world, and who was not about to let some stranger waltz in and potentially hurt her grandson. Mina answered honestly, meeting Sunny's gaze directly and refusing to be intimidated. She talked about her grandmother, about nursing school, about her decision to take this job because Hyun had needed help and she'd been able to provide it. "And my son," Sun Hee said, switching back to Korean so Hyun wouldn't understand. "What are your intentions toward him?" "I don't have any intentions," Mina said, knowing it was at least partly a lie. "I'm here for Hyun." Sunny's expression suggested she didn't believe that for a second. "Minseo was my goddaughter," she said quietly. "I watched her grow up. I blessed her marriage to my son. I held Hyun when he was born. And then I watched her die because she loved a man whose life is built on danger." Mina's throat tightened. "I'm so sorry for your loss." "Are you?" Sun Hee leaned forward slightly. "Because you're walking the same path she did. Getting close to my son, becoming attached to Hyun, entering a world you don't understand. And when the danger comes for you, as it will, what then? You think you can handle it? You think my son can survive losing someone else?" The words hit like a physical blow, and Mina felt her carefully maintained composure crack. "I'm not trying to replace her," she said. "I'm not trying to be anything except someone who cares about Hyun and wants to help." "But you care about Jason too," Sun Hee observed shrewdly. "I can see it in how you look at him, in how you defend him." Mina couldn't deny it, not convincingly, so she stayed silent. Sun Hee studied her for a long moment, then sighed. Minseo was strong too. Stubborn. She thought love would be enough to survive in this life. She was wrong. Before Mina could respond, the elevator chimed and Jason stepped out, freezing when he saw his mother. "Iyama," he said, using the Korean word for mother, surprise and wariness in his voice. "I didn't know you were coming. I wanted to meet the woman who's living in my daughter-in-law's home, taking care of my grandson," Sun Hee said coolly. Jason's jaw tightened. This is still my home, and Mina is here because I asked her to be. Because Hyun needs her. Sunhee stood, gathering her purse with precise movements. I can see that. She looked at Mina one more time, and some of the ice in her expression had thawed slightly. You're good with him. That's clear. And he's happy, which is more than I've seen in 2 years. So I will not interfere. But I will be watching, and if you hurt my family, you will regret it. It wasn't exactly a blessing, but it wasn't a condemnation either. Mina nodded, accepting the warning for what it was. After Sunhee left, Jason ran a hand through his hair in frustration. I'm sorry about that. My mother can be protective. She has every right to be, Mina said. She lost her goddaughter. She's terrified of losing more people she loves. You understood what she said? In Korean? I speak Korean, Mina reminded him gently. And yes, I understood. She warned me about the dangers of loving you. Jason went very still. And what did you say? That I'm here for Hyun, Mina replied, not quite meeting his eyes. Which is true. It was true. It just wasn't the whole truth, and from Jason's expression, he knew it. That night, after Hyun was asleep, Mina found herself unable to settle. She'd been living in the penthouse for a week, and the lines between professional and personal were blurring more every day. She cared about Hyun with a fierceness that sometimes scared her. And Jason, God, Jason was becoming impossible to ignore. She was curled up on the couch with a textbook, trying to focus on cellular biology and failing miserably when Hyun's door opened. Mina looked up to find the boy padding out in his pajamas, his expression troubled. Can't sleep, buddy? She asked, setting aside her book. Hyun climbed onto the couch beside her, curling into her side in a way that had become natural over the past weeks. Can I ask you something? Of course. Are you going to be my new mom? Mina's breath caught. She heard Jason's footsteps stop in the hallway, knew he was listening, and felt the weight of her answer settling on her shoulders. Oh, sweetheart, she said carefully. Why are you asking that? Because you live here now, Hyun said with a child's simple logic. And you take care of me like a mom. And Daddy smiles more when you're here. So I thought maybe you could be my mom. Mina felt tears burning in her eyes. She looked up and found Jason standing in the hallway, his expression devastated. This was dangerous territory, loaded with implications and hopes that could shatter so easily. I care about you so much, Hyun, Mina said gently. More than I can really say. But being a mom is complicated. Your mom, your real mom, she loved you more than anything in the world. No one can replace her. I know, Hyun said quietly. But she's gone. And I miss having a mom. Is it bad that I want a new one? Oh baby, no. Mina pulled him closer, her voice thick with emotion. It's not bad at all. It means you have a big heart with lots of room for love. And that's a beautiful thing. Jason moved into the room then, settling on Hyun's other side, and placing a hand on his son's back. What Mina is trying to say, buddy, is that we need to take things slowly. We can't rush into big decisions just because we want something. But you like her, right, Daddy? Hyun looked between them with guileless hope. I can tell you like her. So why can't she be part of our family? I do like her, Jason said, his eyes meeting Mina's over Hyun's head. Very much. But there are grown-up things we need to figure out first. Okay. Hyun nodded, accepting this with the resilience of childhood. Can I still call her if I have a nightmare? Always, Mina assured him. I'm right down the hall, and I'll always come if you need me. After they'd tucked Hyun back into bed, Jason caught Mina's wrist gently as she turned to go to her room. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I didn't mean for him to put that pressure on you. He's 6, Mina replied. He's processing his grief and trying to make sense of our situation. It's natural. Still, it was unfair to you. Jason hadn't released her wrist, and Mina was hyper-aware of the warmth of his fingers on her skin. And for what it's worth, he's not wrong. I do like you. More than I should, probably. Mina's heart was racing. Jason, we can't do this. I work for you. Hyun needs stability, not to watch us navigate a complicated relationship that might not work out. I know, Jason said, but he was moving closer, and Mina found herself frozen in place. I know all the reasons this is a bad idea. Believe me, I've listed them to myself about 100 times. But I can't stop thinking about you. Can't stop wanting to be near you. Can't stop imagining what it would be like to just give in to this thing between us. They were standing in the hallway outside the bedrooms, close enough that Mina could feel the heat radiating from Jason's body, could smell his cologne, could see the way his pupils had dilated as he looked at her. Every instinct screamed at her to step back, to maintain the professional distance that was already dangerously compromised. Instead, she swayed forward slightly, and Jason's free hand came up to cup her face with a gentleness that made her breath catch. "I shouldn't want this," Jason murmured, his thumb stroking across her cheekbone. "Shouldn't want you. It's too soon after Mincio, too complicated with Hyun, too dangerous with everything else going on. But God help me, Mina, I can't seem to care about any of that when you're standing in front of me." Mina reached up and covered his hand with hers. "You're not betraying her memory by feeling something for someone else," she whispered. "You're allowed to move forward. You're allowed to be happy again." "Am I?" Jason's voice was rough with emotion. "Because it feels like I'm being selfish. Like I'm using you to fill the hole she left, and that's not fair to you, or to her memory." "You're not using me," Mina said firmly. "And moving on doesn't mean forgetting. It means honoring what you had by allowing yourself to live fully again." Jason leaned in, and Mina's eyes fluttered closed, anticipating the kiss, wanting it with an intensity that should have frightened her. She felt his breath on her lips, felt the moment stretching between them like a wire pulled taut. And then Jason pulled back abruptly, letting her go and stepping away. "I can't," he said, his voice strained. "Not like this. Not when you might feel obligated because you work for me, because Hyun asked you to be his mother, because you're living in my home. I won't take advantage of the situation." Mina opened her eyes, breathing hard, her body still thrumming with unfulfilled desire. "You wouldn't be taking advantage. You don't know that," Jason said. "And neither do I. So we're going to take this slowly. We're going to make sure any decision we make comes from a place of certainty, not convenience or proximity or the heat of the moment." He was right. Mina knew he was right. But that didn't stop the sharp sting of disappointment or the frustration of wanting something she couldn't have. "Okay," she managed. Slowly. "Good night, Mina," Jason said. And there was so much weight in those two words, so much unspoken longing, that Mina felt tears prick at her eyes. "Good night," she replied, and fled to her room before she could do something foolish like beg him to reconsider. She lay in bed for hours, staring at the ceiling and replaying the moment in the hallway. The feeling of Jason's hand on her face, the almost kiss that had left her aching and confused. This was becoming impossible. Living here, being close to him every day, feeling the pull of attraction growing stronger while maintaining professional boundaries. Something was going to break eventually. Mina just hoped they'd all survive when it did. The break came 2 days later, though not in the way Mina had anticipated. She'd just dropped Hyun at school and was walking back to the penthouse, security detail trailing at their usual discreet distance, when one of the guards spoke into his earpiece, and suddenly they were moving faster, surrounding her with tense efficiency that made Mina's pulse spike with alarm. "What's happening?" she asked, but the lead guard just shook his head and urged her forward with a hand at her elbow. They reached the building in record time, and the elevator ride up felt endless. When the doors opened, Jason was there, his face a mask of cold fury that made Mina's blood run cold. In his hand, he held a manila envelope. "We need to talk," Jason said, his voice absolutely level in the way that meant he was barely controlling his rage. Now, he led her to his office, and Mina's stomach clenched when she saw what was spread across his desk. Photographs. Dozens of them. Pictures of her and Hyun walking to school. Pictures of her and Jason talking in the penthouse, taken through the windows with a telephoto lens. Pictures of all three of them together, circled in red marker. And in the center of it all, a single note written in Korean. Mina's hands shook as she picked it up, translating the message in her head. "You take what belongs to us, we take what belongs to you. The Lee family remembers its debts." Jason was on his phone, barking orders in rapid Korean to what sounded like his entire security team. Lockdown protocols, immediate threat assessment, personnel reassignments. He moved through the commands with military precision, and Mina saw for the first time the full extent of the dangerous man underneath the devoted father exterior. When he finally hung up, the cold fury was still there, but underneath it, Mina could see fear. Real, visceral fear for her and for Hyun. "This is a direct threat," Jason said. "Against my family. Against you. They're telling me they can reach us anywhere, anytime. That they're watching and waiting for an opportunity." Mina's mind was racing, adrenaline flooding her system. Hyun is at school right now. Is he safe? I have 6 guards with him, including 2 inside his classroom posing as teacher assistants. He's as safe as he can be. Jason moved toward her, his control cracking slightly. But you, Mina, they have photos of you alone. Photos that show they've been watching you for weeks. So what do we do? Mina asked, surprised by how steady her voice sounded when she felt like she was falling apart inside. You stay here, Jason said firmly. No leaving the penthouse without full security detail. No windows without curtains drawn. No routines that can be predicted and exploited. The words should have terrified her. Should have sent her running for the door and back to her simple life of double shifts and financial stress, but relative safety. Instead, Mina felt something else rising in her chest. Anger. White-hot anger at these people who thought they could intimidate her, could use her to hurt Jason and Hyun, could make her afraid in her own life. No, she said flatly. Jason blinked. What? I said no. Mina crossed her arms. I'm not going to hide. I'm not going to let these people dictate how I live my life. You want me to have security? Fine. You want me to be careful? I can do that. But I will not be a prisoner in this penthouse, and I will not let fear win. Mina, this is serious, Jason started, but she cut him off. I know it's serious, she snapped. I'm looking at photos of myself that some creep took while stalking me. I understand the danger. But I also understand that showing fear is exactly what they want. So no, I'm not giving them that satisfaction. Jason stared at her for a long moment, and then something shifted in his expression. The cold fury melted into something else, something heated and intense that made Mina's breath catch. You're incredible, he said quietly. Do you know that? Most people would be running for the door. But you're standing here ready to fight. I'm too stubborn to run, Mina replied, though her bravado was starting to crack now that the immediate rush of anger was fading. And I care too much about Hyun to let him down. Just Hyun? Jason asked, moving closer. Mina swallowed hard. And you, she admitted. I care about you too. More than I should. Jason reached for her, and this time Mina didn't hesitate. She stepped into his arms, letting him pull her close, feeling his heart pounding against her cheek where she pressed against his chest. They stood like that for a long moment, drawing comfort from each other's presence, and Mina felt something settle in her chest. This was right. This connection between them, however complicated and dangerous it might be, it was real and worth fighting for. Come with me, Jason said finally, taking her hand and leading her toward the terrace. Outside, the November air was cold and crisp, and Mina shivered despite the anger still burning in her veins. The city sprawled below them, millions of people going about their lives, unaware of the danger and drama playing out in this penthouse high above the streets. I need you to understand something, Jason said, turning to face her and taking both her hands in his. I would burn this entire city to the ground before I let anyone hurt you. What's happening with the Leaf family? It ends now. I'm done playing defensive. I'm done waiting for them to make the next move. What are you going to do? Mina asked. Whatever I have to, Jason replied, and there was something absolutely ruthless in his expression. But first, I need to do this. He pulled her close and kissed her. It wasn't gentle or tentative. It was desperate and claiming and absolutely certain. Jason's mouth on hers with an intensity that stole her breath and made her knees weak. Mina gasped against his lips, and he deepened the kiss, one hand tangling in her hair and the other pressing against the small of her back, holding her against him like he was afraid she might disappear. Mina kissed him back with equal desperation, her hands fisting in his shirt, months of tension and attraction and denied want pouring into the contact. He tasted like coffee and something darker, something uniquely him, and Mina couldn't get enough. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jason rested his forehead against hers. I'm not sorry, he said firmly. I should be. I should care about all the reasons this is complicated. But I don't. Not anymore. Good, Mina managed, her voice shaky. Because I'm not sorry either. This changes everything, Jason warned. You understand that? If we do this, if we're together, you become even more of a target. The danger increases exponentially. I know, Mina said. And I'm choosing this anyway. I'm choosing you. Choosing Hyun. Choosing us. Jason kissed her again, softer this time, but no less intense. And Mina felt the last of her reservations crumble. This was happening. They were happening. And whatever came next, they would face it together. The week after the photographs arrived passed in a strange state of heightened security and stolen intimacy. Jason had doubled the guards, installed additional cameras, and implemented protocols that made the penthouse feel like a fortress. But within those walls, something had shifted between him and Mina. The kiss on the terrace had broken down the last barriers, and now they existed in a space that was equal parts terrifying and exhilarating. They were careful around Hyun, maintaining appropriate boundaries in front of him, but the moments when the boy was asleep or occupied became something precious. Jason would find excuses to brush past Mina in the kitchen, his hand lingering at the small of her back. She would catch him watching her across the room with an intensity that made her skin flush with heat. They hadn't kissed again, not properly, but the anticipation hummed between them constantly. Mina tried to focus on the normalcy of their routine, on Hyun's homework and his bedtime stories, and the way he'd started calling her Mina Mom, a hybrid that made her heart squeeze every time. They had family dinners where Jason would talk about his day in carefully edited terms while Hyun chattered about school. They watched movies together on the couch, the three of them curled up in a configuration that felt increasingly like a real family. But underneath the domestic calm, Mina could feel the tension. Jason was waiting for something. His phone rang constantly with updates from his security team, and she'd catch him staring out the windows with an expression that suggested he was calculating threats and planning responses. They were in the eye of the storm, and everyone knew it. It happened on a Thursday afternoon, exactly 9 days after the photographs. Mina was walking Hyun out of school, flanked by 4 security guards in their usual positions, when everything went wrong so fast she barely had time to process it. One of the guards, a man named Jun who'd been with them for weeks, suddenly grabbed Hyun's other arm. Before Mina could react, before she could even scream, there was movement everywhere. A van screeched to a stop at the curb. Men poured out, moving with military precision. The other guards went down, shots fired from weapons with silencers that made horrifying soft popping sounds. Mina held on to Hyun with everything she had, screaming for help, trying to pull him back toward the school entrance. Jun wrenched Hyun from her grip with brutal efficiency, and Mina lunged after them. She got her hands on Hyun's jacket, felt the fabric between her fingers, and then something hard connected with the side of her head. Pain exploded across her skull. The world tilted sideways. She hit the pavement hard, tasting blood, and the last thing she saw before darkness took her was Hyun's terrified face as he was dragged into the van. Mina woke to harsh fluorescent lights and the antiseptic smell of a hospital. Her head throbbed with a pain that made her nauseous, and when she tried to sit up, gentle hands pressed her back down. Jason's face swam into focus above her, and the expression on it made her breath catch. He looked destroyed, haunted. His eyes were red-rimmed, and his jaw was tight, with barely controlled fury. Hyun, Mina managed, her voice coming out as a croak. Where is he? Jason's face crumbled for just a second before he pulled himself back together. They took him, he said, his voice rough. The Lee family. They have my son. No. Mina tried to sit up again, panic overriding the pain. No, we have to get him back. Jason, we have to find him. We will, Jason said, and there was something absolutely lethal in his voice. I swear to you, Mina, we will get him back. Every resource I have is focused on finding him. Every contact, every favor owed, everything. I will burn the entire city down if I have to. A doctor appeared, checking Mina's pupils and asking questions about her symptoms. Concussion, he said finally. She needs to stay for observation. At least overnight. I'm fine, Mina insisted, trying to swing her legs off the bed. I need to help find Hyun. You need to rest, Jason said firmly, but Mina saw the fear underneath the command. You were unconscious for 20 minutes. You could have serious head trauma. I don't care, Mina said, and she was crying now, tears streaming down her face. I let them take him. I was supposed to protect him, and I let them take him. Jason pulled her into his arms, careful of her injury, and Mina felt him shaking. This isn't your fault, he said fiercely. You fought for him. My guards told me what happened before they went down. You tried to hold on to him even after June grabbed him. This is on me. I trusted the wrong person. I didn't see the threat from inside. They stayed like that for a long moment, both of them broken and terrified, until Jason's phone rang. He answered immediately, listening intently, and Mina saw his expression shift. Say that again, he ordered. What dialect exactly? When he hung up, he looked at Mina with something like hope in his eyes. One of the witnesses heard the kidnappers speaking Korean. They said the dialect was distinctive, possibly from Busan. Mina's mind started racing despite the pounding in her head. Busan, her grandmother's accent. The specific regional patterns she'd grown up hearing. Wait, she said. In the van, before I got hit. One of the men said something to June. I remember because the accent was so familiar. What did he say? Jason demanded. Mina closed her eyes, fighting through the pain and fear to recall the exact words. He said hurry up in Korean, but the way he pronounced it. She focused, pulling up the memory. It wasn't standard Seoul dialect. It was coastal Busan, the kind older generation speakers use. And he used a specific phrase my grandmother used to say. Jason was already on his phone again, relaying this information. Within minutes, members of his team were in the hospital room, and Mina found herself describing everything she could remember about the accent, the specific word choices, the pronunciation patterns that might narrow down where these men were from. She watched Jason transform in front of her eyes. This wasn't the gentle father or the man who'd kissed her with desperate longing. This was the head of a criminal organization, cold and calculating and absolutely ruthless. He issued commands in rapid Korean, moving pieces on a board she couldn't fully see, and people jumped to follow his orders without question. The information Mina provided led to a connection with a Lee family lieutenant who had Busan roots, who operated out of a specific territory in Queens. Within 2 hours, Jason's people had tracked down a warehouse, confirmed vehicle sightings, verified the location. I'm going, Jason said, and the finality in his voice made it clear this wasn't up for debate. I'm coming with you, Mina said immediately. Absolutely not, Jason replied. You have a concussion. You need to stay here where it's safe. Safe. Mina's voice rose despite the pain in her head. Hyun is out there terrified and you think I'm going to sit in a hospital bed? I'm coming, Jason. You can't stop me. They stared at each other, wills clashing, until finally Jason's second-in-command, Taemin, spoke up. Let her come to command center, he suggested. She can monitor from there. It's secure, and she'll know what's happening in real time. It was a compromise neither of them loved, but Jason finally nodded. Command center only, he said to Mina. You do not leave that location. Promise me. I promise, Mina agreed, though every instinct screamed that she should be there for the rescue. The command center was a nondescript office building in Midtown, but the top floor was filled with technology that looked like something from a spy movie. Multiple screens showed surveillance feeds, communications equipment lined the walls, and a team of people worked with quiet efficiency to coordinate the operation. Mina sat beside Taemin, watching as the screens showed Jason's team moving into position around the warehouse. She could see Jason on one of the feeds, dressed in tactical gear, a weapon at his side that made the reality of his world hit her all over again. This was who he was underneath the tailored suits and gentle smiles. This was the man who commanded fear and respect in equal measure. The operation happened fast. The team breached the warehouse with coordinated precision. Gunfire erupted, brief and brutal. Mina watched the feeds with her heart in her throat, unable to look away and unable to bear looking. She saw men go down. Saw Jason moving through the space with deadly efficiency. Saw the moment they found Hyun, huddled in a corner, terrified but alive. The relief that crashed through Mina was so intense, she thought she might pass out. Taemin's hand on her shoulder steadied her as they watched Jason scoop his son into his arms. Watched the way Hyun clung to his father. Watched the team extract them from the building and into waiting vehicles. It's over, Taemin said quietly. The Lee family is finished. This was their last play, and they lost. Mina nodded numbly, unable to speak past the emotion clogging her throat. She'd seen violence today, had witnessed the brutal reality of Jason's world in a way that couldn't be unseen or explained away. But she'd also seen a father fight for his child with everything he had, and that mattered too. Jason brought Hyun directly to the hospital, and Mina was waiting when they arrived. The boy launched himself at her the moment he saw her, sobbing against her shoulder, and Mina held him while her own tears fell. I'm sorry, she kept saying. I'm so sorry I couldn't stop them. You tried, Hyun hiccuped. I saw you try. You didn't let go even when they hit you. Over Hyun's head, Mina met Jason's eyes. He looked exhausted and haunted, blood on his clothes that she didn't want to think about too closely. But he was alive. Hyun was alive. They'd survived. The doctors insisted on keeping Hyun overnight for observation, more for psychological evaluation than physical injury. He hadn't been hurt, just terrified, and Jason refused to leave his side. Mina stayed too, curled in an uncomfortable chair while Jason sat on the edge of Hyun's bed, holding his son's hand while the boy finally slept. "You should go home," Jason said quietly around midnight. "Get some rest. You have a concussion." "I'm not going anywhere," Mina replied. "We're in this together, remember?" Jason looked at her for a long moment, and Mina saw the weight of what had happened settling on him. "This is my world," he said finally. "This violence, this danger. This is what loving me means. What staying with us means. And I need you to really understand that before we go any further." "I understand," Mina said, though part of her wondered if anyone could truly understand until they'd lived it. "Do you?" Jason's voice was harsh with emotion. "Because you got hurt today. You could have been killed. Hyun was kidnapped and traumatized. All because of who I am and what I do. And this won't be the last time. There will always be threats. Always be people trying to hurt the people I love to get to me." Mina stood and moved to sit beside him on the bed, taking his free hand in both of hers. "I know," she said, "and I'm choosing this anyway. Choosing you. Choosing Hyun. Choosing us. Even after seeing what I'm capable of?" Jason asked. "Even knowing that I killed people today to get my son back?" "Yes," Mina said firmly. "Because you did what you had to do to protect your family. And I would have done the same thing if I could have." Jason's eyes searched hers, looking for doubt or fear or judgment. But Mina met his gaze steadily, letting him see the truth. She'd crossed a line today, had entered his world fully and irrevocably. And she wasn't running. "I love you," Jason said quietly, the words falling between them like stones into still water. "I know it's too soon and too complicated and probably the worst possible timing. But I love you, Mina Park. You walked into our lives and changed everything. And I can't imagine going back to who I was before you." Mina felt tears sliding down her cheeks again. "I love you too," she whispered. "Both of you. You're my family now." Jason kissed her then, soft and reverent. A promise and a commitment wrapped into the gentle pressure of his lips on hers. When they pulled apart, Hyun stirred in his sleep, and they both turned to watch him. This child who'd brought them together and given them both a reason to fight. "The Lee family is gone," Jason said. "Eliminated completely. Their operations shut down, their leadership scattered or imprisoned. It's over, Mina. We're safe now." "For how long?" Mina asked, because she needed to know. How long before the next threat? Jason was quiet for a moment. "I'm making changes," he said finally. "Restructuring my business to minimize the dangerous elements. It won't happen overnight, but I'm working toward a future where Hyun can grow up without constant threats. Where you don't have to live in fear. That's all I ask," Mina said. "Not perfection. Not a complete exit from your world. Just the promise that you're trying to build something better for all of us." "I promise," Jason said. "And I keep my promises." They sat together in the quiet hospital room, holding hands and watching Hyun sleep, and Mina felt something settle in her chest. This was her life now. This family, this love, this complicated, dangerous, beautiful life. And she was choosing it with her eyes wide open, knowing the risks and accepting them anyway. Because some things were worth fighting for. Some people were worth the danger. And this family, broken and rebuilt and stronger for it, was worth everything. They stayed in the hospital for 2 days while Hyun was evaluated and Mina's concussion was monitored. In that strange suspended time, surrounded by beeping machines and the antiseptic smell of medical care, they became something more solid. A unit. A family in truth rather than just proximity and circumstance. On the third morning, when they were finally cleared to go home, Jason called a family meeting in the hospital room. Hyun sat on the bed between them, and Jason took both their hands in his. "I need to ask you something," he said to Mina, his voice serious. "And I need you to be completely honest with me, no matter what the answer is." Mina's heart started racing. "Okay, after everything that happened, after seeing the worst parts of my world, after being hurt and watching Hyun be taken, do you still want this?" Jason's eyes searched hers. "Do you still want us? Because I will understand if you don't. I will understand if you need to walk away and build a life that's safer and simpler." Mina looked at Hyun, at his anxious little face watching her with the kind of hope that could break hearts. Then she looked back at Jason, at the man who'd fought his way through hell to save his son, who'd shown her vulnerability and strength in equal measure, who'd somehow become essential to her happiness in just a few months. "I want this," she said firmly. "I want you and Hyun and whatever messy, complicated life we build together. I'm not going anywhere." Hyun threw his arms around her waist with a relieved sob, and Jason's expression transformed, relief and love and something deeper washing across his features. "Then I have one more question," he said, and to Mina's shock, he slid off the hospital bed and onto one knee. "Jason, what are you doing?" Mina breathed. From his pocket, Jason pulled a small velvet box. "Mina Park, you walked into our lives when we were both broken and lost. You showed my son compassion when he needed it most. You stood by us through danger and fear. You fought for Hyun even when it put you at risk. And you loved us when we didn't think we deserved to be loved again." He opened the box to reveal a ring with 3 stones, diamonds that caught the fluorescent light and sparkled. "These 3 stones represent the 3 of us. A family. And I'm asking you to make it official. Will you marry me?" Mina couldn't speak past the emotion clogging her throat. Tears streamed down her face as she nodded, finally managing to choke out the word. "Yes. Yes, of course yes." Jason slipped the ring onto her finger, and Hyun cheered, bouncing on the bed with pure joy. "We're going to be a real family," he announced. "Mina is going to be my mom for real." Jason stood and pulled Mina into his arms, kissing her with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "I love you," he murmured against her lips. "I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret this choice." "I already don't regret it," Mina whispered back. "This is exactly where I'm supposed to be." The next month was a whirlwind of change and adjustment. Jason was true to his word about restructuring his business, bringing in new management to handle the more dangerous operations while he focused on the legitimate aspects of his empire. It wouldn't happen overnight, he explained, but he was committed to building a safer future for their family. Mina finished her semester with grades that would have been better if she hadn't been dealing with kidnapping and proposals, but she passed everything, and that was enough. She officially moved all her belongings from her Astoria apartment into the penthouse, transforming the guest room into her own space, even though she spent most nights in Jason's bed. They told Hyun together that they were getting married, and the boy's excitement was boundless. He helped pick out flowers for the wedding, insisted on being the ring bearer, and asked approximately 1,000 questions about when he could start calling Mina mom officially. Sunhee came to visit again, and this time her reception was warmer. She looked at the ring on Mina's finger, at the way Hyun clung to both of them, at the obvious love between Mina and Jason, and finally smiled. "You're stronger than I gave you credit for," she said to Mina in Korean. "And you make my son happy. You make my grandson feel safe. That's all I can ask for." "Thank you," Mina said, and meant it. "Your blessing means everything." "Mincio would have liked you," Sunhee said quietly. "She would have been glad that you're taking care of her boys." The wedding was small and private, held in the penthouse with only close family and Jason's most trusted associates in attendance. Mina wore a simple white dress and carried a bouquet of white roses mixed with traditional Korean flowers. Hyun stood beside Jason in a miniature suit, holding the rings with utmost seriousness. Sunhee cried through the entire ceremony. Jason's voice was rough with emotion as he said his vows, promising to love and protect Mina for the rest of his life, promising to build a future worthy of the trust she'd placed in him. Mina's own vows were simpler, promising to stand beside him through whatever came, to love both him and Hyun with everything she had, to choose them every day for the rest of her life. When the officiant declared them married, Hyun cheered before Jason could even kiss his bride. The room erupted in laughter, and Jason swept both Mina and Hyun into his arms, the 3 of them standing together in a moment of perfect happiness. That night, after the small reception had ended and Hyun was finally asleep, Jason and Mina stood on the terrace where he'd first kissed her. The city glittered below them, and Mina leaned into her husband's warmth, marveling at how much had changed in such a short time. "No regrets?" Jason asked softly. "Not a single one," Mina replied. "You?" "Just one," Jason said, and when Mina pulled back to look at him in alarm, he smiled. "I regret not finding you sooner. Not having more time with you." "We have the rest of our lives," Mina reminded him. "That's plenty of time." 8 months later, Mina stood in the kitchen of their penthouse, one hand resting on her slightly rounded belly, watching Jason help Hyun with homework at the kitchen island. It was a scene that had become wonderfully ordinary, domestic in the best possible way. She'd graduated from nursing school 2 months earlier, and now worked part-time at a children's hospital doing exactly what she'd always dreamed of. The flexible schedule gave her time with Hyun, time with Jason, and time to prepare for the new addition to their family. The baby had been a surprise, discovered during a routine checkup, when Mina had gone in complaining of exhaustion. Jason had nearly passed out when she told him, cycling rapidly through shock and joy and terror at the thought of being responsible for another tiny human. But now, watching him help Hyun sound out a difficult word, Mina could see the quiet happiness in his expression. He was ready. They both were. Hyun had adjusted beautifully to calling her mom, though he still sometimes used Mina mom when he was particularly excited or emotional. He was thriving in school, sleeping through the night without nightmares, and had recently informed them that he wanted to be a doctor when he grew up, so he could help people like Mina did. The threats had stopped. Jason's restructuring of his business meant fewer enemies, and the Lee family's elimination had sent a clear message to anyone else who might have considered making a move. They still had security, still took precautions, but the constant fear had faded into something more manageable. Mina's hand moved in small circles over her belly, feeling the flutter of movement that still amazed her every time. A daughter, the ultrasound had revealed. A little girl who would grow up surrounded by love and protection, who would have an older brother who already adored her, and parents who would give her the world. "What are you thinking about?" Jason asked, looking up from the homework and catching her watching them. "How lucky I am," Mina said honestly. "How different my life is from what I thought it would be." Jason stood and crossed to her, pulling her into his arms and resting his hand over hers on her belly. "We're the lucky ones," he murmured. "You gave us everything we didn't know we needed." Hyun appeared at their side, wrapping his arms around both of them as far as they would reach. "Group hug," he announced, and they stood like that in the kitchen, the three of them soon to be four, surrounded by the ordinary magic of a family built from kindness and choice and love. Mina thought back to that Friday night at Songbird, to the moment when she'd heard a child crying and made the split-second decision to help. She'd had no idea where that choice would lead, no way to predict the danger and love and family that would follow. But standing here now, feeling her husband's heartbeat against her back and her son's small hands clutching her waist, feeling her daughter moving inside her, Mina knew she would make the same choice 1,000 times over. Sometimes the most important moments in life came disguised as chaos in a restaurant. Sometimes compassion opened doors to futures we couldn't imagine. Sometimes love arrived in the form of a desperate father and his grieving son and changed everything. So tell me, have you ever had a moment like that? A moment where a simple choice to be kind led you somewhere unexpected? Drop a comment and share your story, because I believe we all have them. These moments where compassion and courage intersect and create something beautiful. Where family isn't just about blood, but about who shows up and chooses to stay. Where love is powerful enough to overcome fear and build something lasting. This was Mina's story, a story of second chances and found family and love that conquered fear. And as she stood in her kitchen with her family around her, she knew it was just the beginning of their happily ever after.